Good afternoon, guys, and today I want to get that video series started that I mentioned a couple of videos ago where I talk about domesticated plants in their natural state, in their natural habitat. And today I want to talk about Helianthus annuus, which is the common sunflower. I guess this could be Helianthus petiolaris, but that all aside, this is really one of the few plants I can actually do in Utah because it's, as far as I'm aware, the only crop that grows in the wild in Utah. But to explain why that is and why this video series might be so hard for me to make, I really got to talk about the history of agriculture, which is not something I really know too much about, at least until a few days ago. So this might be a little rough. It's certainly a little bit out of my comfort zone, but let's just get started and jump right into the video. So 12 to 13,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, everyone on Earth more or less were living as hunter-gatherers, foraging in the wild for plants, hunting wild animals for meat, catching fish, poaching eggs, honey hunting, all sorts of ways we could get food back then. What exact species were relied upon and what proportions varied from place to place. Some people ate more plants, some people ate more meat, but that's not really important. What is important to know is that everyone on Earth was getting their food from the bounty that nature provided, and they were heavily dependent upon, the wild for plants, rather than growing their own crops or raising their own animals for food. But that was all going to change. Starting around this time in the Near East, in a region called the Fertile Crescent, which is an area centered on Iraq, Syria, southeastern Turkey, and the countries of the Levant, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, people began to grow plants from seeds they had foraged in the wild, which could be a more stable source of food. Why we started doing this or what prompted us to, we may never know, but the fact that, we occasionally spilled some seeds that we brought back to our living spaces that would then grow next year likely helped us put the piece together that this is something we could do. But where things really got interesting was when we started to grow the seeds specifically of individual plants we thought had particularly desirable characteristics, like bigger yield, larger seeds or fruits, better flavor, or maybe just easier to process. This is interesting because, for one, it required a little extra ingenuity, but two, it required some forethought and restraint because this often meant giving up the best portion of each year's harvest with the hope that next year's would be even better. It really required us to plan for the future, but that is what we did, and the result ultimately was the world's first crops. There were many plant species we experimented with, but ultimately only a few crops emerged, at least at the beginning. A few varieties of wheat like amaranth, einkorn, barley, lentils, chickpeas, regular peas, maybe a few types of fruit like maybe some grapes and date palms and stuff like that. It's really hard to know exactly what the first domesticated crops were. I think one source even suggests it was a seedless fig, like a branch was just cut from it and planted in the ground, and that became the very first domesticated plant. Really interesting stuff, but what matters is that this all happened in the Near East and really kickstarted what was called the Neolithic Revolution, which is a whole big host of changes that dramatically altered the way we had lived compared to how we did for the previous several 100,000 years as a species, because we are now farmers, or at least going to become farmers. And the real benefit of agriculture was that it provided us a more stable source of food that we could produce in greater abundance. So our population started to grow. Traditionally, humans lived in bands, typically no more than 150 people, though it probably varied from place to place. But this allowed us to live in larger groups, and because it's not easy preparing land to be ready for agriculture, it prompted us to stay in one place for an extended period of time. So what we started to do was we basically started living in the first towns and villages, because we're living in groups larger than 150 in the same place over and over again. And since we're producing so much food, not everyone needed to be involved in the food production system, so some specialized occupations started to emerge. We started to develop new technology that could let us produce even more food, or have even more leisure time to do, or at least time to do other things other than producing food. Because hunter-gatherers were mostly preoccupied with getting food all the time. And although they had a lot of leisure, they didn't have, they just weren't really innovating that much. Although there were some, of course, major innovations in the last, hundreds of thousands or millions of years of our species. That's a really different topic, though. Important to know is that we started to develop new technologies like metallurgy or pottery that made our lives even easier and allow us to expand our populations more and develop more technology and so on and so forth until here we are in the modern day. You guys watching this video, hopefully. The modern world truly would not be possible without agriculture, but it was not without its downsides at first, and some which maybe still continue to this day. For instance, despite having more food than ever, our diets paradoxically became a lot less nutritious, and we became less healthy because instead of relying on a diverse hunter-gatherer diet, maybe eating some acorns, eating some sagebrush leaves, not sure you can actually do that, occasional grain, and more animals, all sorts of things you could periodically forage from the wild, relying on just a couple of crops for the majority of our diet, typically mostly grains and legumes. And we began to lack certain minerals and vitamins from our diet, and eventually nutritional deficiencies, which were once rare for hunter-gatherers, became the commonplace for their farmer descendants. This has gotten better over time as we domesticated more crops, and these other domesticated crops have become, a bigger part of our diet and more easily accessible. But still, most of the world, or at least much of the world, faces the real threat of nutritional deficiency from their diet, which may not have been such a big deal or just common for hunter-gatherers, though. It's not to say life is easy for them, just that there's maybe some trade-offs. Another issue is that disease became more common. Disease is always a part of pretty much the lives of any plant and animal. It's always something they had to face, but the fact that we're living in closer quarters, in larger groups, gave viruses and bacteria more opportunities to spread between us back and forth, evolving more virulent or destructive strains. So disease became a more bigger hardship than it perhaps was in the past. This was compounded firstly by the fact that waste management became an issue because we're all living in the same place in larger numbers, so our living conditions were perhaps less sanitary. And the fact that we started to domesticate animals and force them to live in similar conditions to us, in tighter quarters and larger groups than they were ever used to in their ancestral form. So disease began to spread amongst them, evolving different, more virulent strains until eventually some could spread to us. There's actually likely quite a lot of diseases that we face every day that came from animals originally. And this other one is really more controversial, but this was also the beginning of social stratification. Because back in the times of hunter-gatherers, pretty much everyone more or less was involved in food production. So there's less opportunity for some people to become more or less wealthy than others. And that really changed with agriculture, especially when some people could become merchants and start accumulating wealth that way. And eventually, over the centuries or thousands of years, different political classes evolved. And I don't think I explained that much about that. It's maybe controversial because it's hard to argue that some social stratification wasn't necessary for the modern world as we know it for its luxuries to happen, but certainly political strife and social strife was probably a lot less common for hunter-gatherers. Again, not to say that their lives were easy or peaceful without violence from either animals or other bands of hunter-gatherers, but it does seem, looking at the archaeological evidence, that there's a conflict like that was likely more rare than it had been once it became farmers. It's really something that's difficult to know for sure, though. And again, this is a controversial upside or downside, but nevertheless, that is what happened. And that all aside, the Near East was not the only place that agriculture spontaneously developed. It happened in several areas the world over since the end of the last ice age. A place known as centers of origin, or Vavilov centers, named after Nikolai Vavilov, who was a Soviet researcher who did a lot of work untangling the origins of various domestic crops, since that become lost knowledge over time. And pretty much any time agriculture develops in a place, it starts to spread, be it through expansion of the agriculturalist or through trade. So about the beginning of the age of exploration, 600 years ago, almost the whole world was either pastoralists or farmers, or some mix of the two, and true hunter-gatherers have become rather rare, though of course they still exist today even. Now, the actual significance of these Vavilov centers can be debated. It's certainly important to know that they're real, that certain crops originated from certain places and stuff like that, but the actual significance of the people living there or these places could be debated because, not to say it wasn't an amazing achievement to develop agriculture, it certainly was, but the fact is that there's really no through lines connecting all of these people and places. The several Vavilov centers that exist over the world are found in both tropical and temperate climates alike in both hemispheres, in environments as diverse as the people who lived there and first developed agriculture. And truth be told, many places didn't get a chance to become Vavilov centers because agriculture spread too quickly to them. Had agriculture not spread from their centers of origin, we probably would be a lot less advanced today, but many other places likely would have developed it. And as soon as agriculture gets introduced to a new area, people tend to start breeding these crops to become their own specialized varieties, specialized for a local taste or local climate, and they start to domesticate native wild wild plants, not crops yet, from the areas they live in. And then those get traded around. So really, there's lots of places crops originate from around the world. Wow, I think I nailed that. I don't think I ever had such a long narration unbroken like that. Maybe I had once. I hit the 10-minute mark, so I had to start the clip over. But anyways, including the Fertile Crescent, there are 6 Vavilov centers known with absolute certainty. And they are, in addition to Fertile Crescent, the highlands of New Guinea, somewhere in China, be it northern or southern, difficult to know where it was developed first, in the high Andes, in the Altiplano above the tree line, Mesoamerica, and the Eastern Agricultural Complex, which is where the sunflower was domesticated, actually. That was sort of centered on the Ohio River Valley. Not quite here, but I'll get to that later. And with less certainty, there was the Amazon Basin, West Africa, and the Sahel or tropical Sudanian savanna. Probably a mix of both, to be honest. The Ethiopian highlands, and somewhere in India. Hard to know for sure because we don't know if India was a true Vavilov center, but it was likely in the Indus River Valley. And this is overall why it'd be a difficult series to make. Most of these places, if you can tell, are not where I live. They are all over the world, places that are often remote and difficult to access, or downright unsafe and politically unstable. So this might be a series that goes on for several decades if I really want to fully flesh it out. I mean, even if nothing else, it'd be expensive to travel to all these places and I have to bang out every single video each time I go to one because I just don't want to revisit many of these places. I mean, it would be cool actually, but I don't have so much time in my life. But overall, that's sort of the problem with the series and why I have to start here with a sunflower, which isn't even where the sunflower was domesticated. It's just a place where it happens to grow naturally. But without further ado, let's get into the main meat of this video. Well, I guess first I should talk about the Eastern Agricultural Complex first. I'm not quite at the area I wanted to film, because the Eastern Agricultural Complex was, I think, the latest Vavilov center to develop, probably about only 4,000 years ago. The people living there, formerly subsisting on a diet of hickory nuts, or at least that was based on hickory nuts, had instead switched to a diet based on seeds and started to domesticate plants for their seeds, among them, in addition to the sunflower, maygrass, erect knotweed, little barley, marsh elder or sumpweed, scientific name is Iva annua, and pigs for Echinopodium, along with a few others. Pigfoot actually is a relative of quinoa, which was domesticated in the Andes, but that's really a topic for another day. Now, most of these crops were fine, I guess, but they were ultimately abandoned when maize arrived to the Eastern Agricultural Complex because it was just such a superior crop. It took a second for it to reach there because it was hard to get breed varieties that could grow in more northerly latitudes, but they finally did it. And maize basically spread all over much of the rest of the American continent when that happened. But the sunflower held on, was eventually moved, taken over to Europe after Christopher Columbus's time, where it became, there's a lot more experimentation that went on with it. It became a major crop in Ukraine and Russia. And I guess here we are today. Now I gotta go find some sunflowers to talk about. Well, that was fortunately a lot quicker than I thought it would be, because here we have a great specimen of it. Helianthus annuus, the common sunflower. It's a plant that's widespread in North America, all over the arid, or semi-arid more like, western United States. Like places that may get 15 to 20 inches of rainfall, but also on the Great Plains and into some areas of the eastern states and the forests. Like some of the other plants of the Eastern Agricultural Complex, it's one that loves disturbed soil and loves to grow, colonize new places. It likely specialized in growing along bison trails, or maybe in places that were for landslides, or where there was recently overwashed floodplain, so just any place can get quickly colonized. Actually, this one probably not, but a lot of the other eastern agricultural complex species likely grew in floodplains. This one, though, again, really may have been just like any disturbed soil, where it's maybe mesic to somewhat dry, which bison trolls would be a great example of. Now, this doesn't quite look like the cultivated sunflowers we know today, though I'm sure it's obviously immediately recognizable as one, because this one branches much more, has smaller flowers, or should I say capitulum, because this really isn't one flower. This is many flowers that are modified to look as if it was one flower. That's a characteristic of the Asteraceae, which is the daisy family. Well, I normally call it the sunflower family, and the sunflower really is just a totally characteristic species of it. It's really something incredible. But all these petals really go back to one little flower that have been modified to have just one big petal that grow right on the rim. And if you look really closely up here, it might be difficult. You can sort of see that those are all a bunch of little flowers that once pollinated will produce one seed, or I guess I should say achene, or I guess I should really properly say cypsela, because that is the characteristic fruit of the family Asteraceae. And ever, all flowering plants produce fruit, and all fruits are produced by flowering plants. Some just look like seeds, but they truly actually just have a seed inside. Anyhow, this is what it looks like. The leaves probably look a lot like sunflower leaves to you guys. But this plant, though it can produce a ton of seeds in this form, may not be very good for cultivated fields, so they are bred to have no branches and produce one much larger capitulum right at the very top, so they can be grown as a row crop much more efficiently, and also bred to produce larger seeds. Now, the sunflower isn't cultivated for the most part for its seeds that we can buy in like gas stations or whatever, bird seed. It's mostly grown for its oil, so it's cleverly called an oil crop. There's quite a few of them. Most of them are seed crops of the oil palm, which is the most efficient as the oil comes from the fruit. Same with the coconut. But again, that's really a different story for another time. It's a really cool plant, honestly. And as some of you guys know, a major symbol of Ukraine due to recent events, but it's also very important in Russia. I think both of them are the two largest growers of this plant. But certainly a lot get grown in America too. Again, for whatever reason, probably just because of some natural superiority of this crop, it was one of the few to survive the sort of wipeout that maize left on the eastern agricultural complex. It's possible that squash was also domesticated there, but it was also domesticated in Mesoamerica, so it's difficult to know if that one just replaced the squash already growing there, so I don't know. I'm not sure what else to talk about it. I'm going to say that this is sort of a habitat you'd find it growing in the wild in many years past. It was something that bison could munch on, grows aggressively. It's a perennial that grows year after year, and it's great on this sort of disturbed soil. I mean, you can also get a bit taller than this. I mean, this one's about 4 feet tall. There's a slight chance it might have some cultivated DNA in it, just because I'm sure some of these people are growing sunflowers around the place, but I think this is pretty much a wild plant. So there you go. That's sort of what my series is going to be like, although I'm not going to explain the origins of agriculture every single time. I really hope that monologue came out well, because, I mean, if it didn't come out well, you guys might not even be watching this video, but I think it did. I really practiced it a lot, which was a lot of work, trust me. So I guess thanks for watching and see you next time. I might also actually do some common garden ornamentals for this series, because I'm sure some of you guys maybe wonder, oh, where do camellias come from, or where do vincas come from? And that'd be a lot easier to make, because those really come from all over the world. So I might not be able to talk about all the biggest, most popular garden ornamentals, but I might have more opportunities to talk about them given the wide variety of places they come from as compared to domesticated crops, because even though they're domesticated, all the food we eat was domesticated all over the world, really, I mean, most of the big crops did come from the Vavilov centers and just spread out from there. But yeah, once again, thanks for watching and see you next time.